Welcome back, folks. Next up, I've got what I will simply describe as a smooth operator. They came in, they bragged, it's like, oh, I've timed myself perfectly, a 40-minute talk. I'll leave enough time for questions. And that's why it's important to me that you guys remember to use the Q&A section at the end of this to take advantage of that big brain of his. Because next up, I've got Anton Kazakov coming in to talk about performance and career management frameworks for engineers. Anton, floor.
Hey everyone, thank you, Darren, for introducing me, especially for introducing me as a smooth operator. That's flattering. Okay, cool. So, I'm Anton, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me, everyone. And I'm going to talk in the next 40 minutes about the healthy performance management for engineers. First, a little bit about me. I work as an engineering director at the company called Canonical. We're the publisher of Ubuntu. By the way, we have recently had a long-term support release called Noble Numbered. So all Ubuntu users out there, if you want to install a brand new long-term support release, go ahead. All of those who are using older systems, you'll be able to upgrade a little later. Yeah. As an engineering leader, I also mentor and coach other engineering leaders gladly. Currently, I can only do that pro bono for various reasons. So yeah, if you have a topic and you want my advice on it for any reason, just knock on my LinkedIn or send me an email. I'd be glad to help you. I'm also a father and fan of mountain skiing and hiking. And enough about me. Oh, yes, one important bit. Canonical is hiring a lot of open positions. Just go ahead to canonical.com/careers and maybe you find something for yourself. Yeah, that's definitely enough about me. Let's talk about people performance management. And first, I want to ask you a question. What do you feel when I say people performance management? There's probably a lot that you feel, so you can definitely leave comments about what you feel in the chat. However, maybe some of you feel some discomfort. People performance management, it's like someone is laying a cold palm on your shoulder, right? And like performance management. Or maybe some of you cringed a little bit because that's such a corporate term, so HR and so on, right? Nothing good comes out of it. And also for the same reason, maybe some of you feel anxiety hearing this in. And let me tell you, I've been there. I can relate to that. And I felt all of that hearing people performance management. And I just want to say that it doesn't have to be that way. And every individual working at a company, every employee deserves a good performance management system for themselves. So let's talk about what a good performance management system could look like. And because most of us, at least, work in engineering organizations, let's talk about a slightly tailored to engineers, a system slightly tailored to engineers. And first, what do you think the goals of performance management are? Some people will tell you that it's maybe satisfy the board of directors and the HR. Well, whereas it can totally be indirectly a goal, but hopefully that's not directly a goal. Some people say, it's definitely to fire bottom performers every now and again. That's an awful goal for a performance management system, and both of these are wrong. I would argue that the right goals for a people performance management system would be setting performance expectations for individuals, monitoring and improving their performance over time, providing sufficient and convincing evidence for taking well-informed decisions in underperformance situations, career progression need situations. And importantly, also, it is to provide a solid foundation for people's career progression. And what's also very interesting, both within and outside of the company. So a good performance management system at a company can actually map out, you will see that, map out one's entire career for the foreseeable future. And that is going to be independent from the company they work at currently. So let's take care of each and every one of these 4 goals one by one, starting with setting performance expectations. Right. That's basically like threefold, I would say. First of all, it's about task level expectations. All those Jira tasks that we know and like. Just with enough description, enough clear requirements. SMART goals, which stands for, as many of you probably know, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. The task level, it's easy. Role level expectations, though, are a little more complex and interesting because it's not day to day. They don't necessarily, jump to mind when you think about setting expectations. At least not in the full detail that they are required in. This is about setting expectations from a person's skills, knowledge, ability, and impact, what they actually do in their role, based on their role. And this is when career progression frameworks and team-specific role requirements come to rescue. And spoiler alert, we're going to spend a whole bunch of time just in a bit talking about career progression frameworks, because that's a central tool for a good performance management system. However, before that, let's also mention that there's another layer of expectations, and it is expected role level dynamics of meeting the expectations of particular roles. So say someone gets promoted to a senior engineer. When do you expect them to fulfill all of the expectations of the role, or the majority? Same goes for a new hire. So this also needs to be defined. Now, as promised, let's talk about career progression frameworks. First of all, what are they? This is roughly what they look like. This is a diagram made by a company called Redgate and published on their website, progression.red-gate.com. And it consists of a bunch of bubbles arranged in paths, career progression paths. As you can see, there are broadly 4 paths, concretely 5. We're going to talk about why there are 5 and not 4, when there are 4 expertise areas of expertise that they're covering. So you can see that they're covering the engineering part of the org, the coaching part of the org, whatever Redgate defines it as. So this is a distinct area of expertise that they also have a progression framework path for. Then they also define the path for product designers and product managers. And behind each and every bubble in this diagram, there's a rather comprehensive description of all of the expectations from the role that the bubble represents. So a career progression framework, building one, is actually quite a large undertaking, which is necessary, but still large. So why put ourselves through that? Well, because career progression frameworks are very helpful with 3 very important things. They help map the current skills of an individual to the expectations from a role, let's say their current role, and identify gaps. Why is it useful? Because isn't that the core of performance evaluation? You have criteria, and these criteria are public to the person. So they know what is expected, and they can steer their work and development towards the goals that are identified. There are going to be gaps. They're going to be defined by the same expectations. So it's not going to be surprising to the people who know these expectations that these gaps have been identified. Now, even if there are no gaps between their performance and the current role that they're in, there definitely are going to be gaps between their performance and the next role, which also is very helpful to devise an efficient career progression path for them. And then finally, career progression frameworks, these kind of diagrams and so on, they motivate people via setting a North Star goal for them, because they show that progression to higher levels is possible. It's kind of demystified. There is an answer to the question, I'm a junior software engineer or a junior product manager. How do I become a senior product manager at this company? There's a quick and easy way to answer this sort of question. So what should a good career progression framework have to be helpful with all of that? Well, a bunch of things. First and foremost, all levels of all areas of expertise in your organization, let's say in a tech department, should be covered by this. From the very entry level, like junior engineers, or some people define it as software engineer 1, to the CTO, because it is important to know the expectations from the CTO and how they are different from other levels at the company and so on. And also make sure to cover all areas of expertise that there are. Software engineers can split into backend engineers, front-end engineers, DevOps engineers. Product managers would be a separate path. If you have support engineers, maybe support engineers, and what have you. Now, each of the progression paths where it makes sense should have individual contributor and manager tracks. Why? Because it's awful to ask someone who doesn't want to be a people manager to become one, because that's the only way they can grow at your company. They will probably opt for not growing further at your company in many cases. So there must be an individual contributor track that doesn't involve people management, because not all people want to do it. Not all people can do it as well. That's a pretty certain set of skills. So an individual contributor path there would be something like, a senior engineer getting promoted into staff engineer position, where they think of cross-team architecture, cross system architecture to your company, where they pull off large technical programs, projects, and so on and so forth. So that sort of growth. Advanced career progression frameworks even cover 3 tracks, which is a manager, people manager, a technical leader, this sort of staff engineer that I've just described, and also kind of a high-level hands-on builder, operating across teams and actually building cross-system things that are incredibly complex but needed to be built fast, and so on and so forth. Now, for each and every bubble on your diagram, similar to the diagram that Redgate created, there must be a detailed description of the expectations in terms of the skills, the knowledge, the ability that's required, in terms of the impact that needs to be seen. So this is how the skills, the knowledge, and the ability are practiced, are put to work. And also sometimes there are certifications that are required. Now there is also an extra thing that is often overlooked, and this is about ways to recognize specific extra contribution, often known as add-on roles. For instance, an architect. Sometimes a company doesn't have a distinct architect role because this role is being actually fulfilled on a part-time basis, so to say, within each and every individual team by a couple of senior engineers, for instance. There needs to be a way to set expectations from it and recognize the main thing. The most important thing is to recognize that people do this work on top of the things that are defined in in their main role. Same goes for mentors, speakers, security experts. Security needs to be built into the system of thinking. There's going to be a panel discussion on this, by the way, tomorrow, so feel free to join. I'm going to participate there with a bunch of other very thoughtful folks, so it's going to be interesting. So yes, these add-on rules also need to be defined. Let's take a look at some examples. For instance, this is how a company called DevExperts defines their defines the hard skills for their JavaScript engineers. For instance, on the middle level, E4 as they call it, they expect an engineer to know about asynchronicity primitives of JavaScript, for instance. So async await, promises, and so on and so forth, and a bunch of other things. For their senior engineers, they put a requirement of knowing about memory management, garbage collection, also about some advanced functional programming concepts. This is how Redgate defines their soft skill requirements for, if I remember correctly, a senior engineer. So emotional intelligence. What does it mean exactly? Here's what. 3 bullet points: recognizing the feeling of others and adapting your approaches accordingly, being able to draw out opinions of others to help make decisions, and so on. Then this is how DevExperts define impact expectations from, if I remember correctly, also a senior engineer. So they break down tasks for the rest of the team. They are actively engaged in hiring as primary interviewers, and so on and so forth. So yeah, this is the least, I would say, level of detail you want to define it on. Sometimes you want to even go more detailed and more comprehensive. So as I mentioned, building a career progression framework is a rather large undertaking. Luckily, there are tools nowadays. So there's this progression.fyi website with a large collection of progression frameworks published by established industry members. There's this website, engineeringladders.com, with a rather comprehensive framework for engineering ladders, not so elaborate. And there's a rather simplistic framework, which is perhaps a good starting point or is useful for smaller organizations, which is open sourced by Sarah Drasna, the author of the book Engineering Management for the Rest of Us, which I can totally recommend that way. However, because it's still complex, even with the tools, let's talk about tips and gotchas that are useful while building and rolling out a career progression framework at your organization. First and foremost, iterate as little as possible. Unlike many things, especially in software engineering and feature development, product development nowadays, where the approach is good when it's agile, right? You iterate, you introduce changes, and so on and so forth. Career progression frameworks are pretty much waterfall, because changing a career progression framework, kind of live when it's already rolled out, is very painful. It is moving goalposts for your team members, changing expectations that they've spent quite a bit of time and effort adjusting to. That's going to be painful and is not going to be appreciated. So it is a very good idea to get your career progression framework right, or at least mostly right, on the first attempt. To do that, besides being very thoughtful and spending time on it, it helps involving your senior team members to get their perspective, so that at least it is not very surprising. And also, you can asking your senior team members, you can probably anticipate well, like what expectations from more junior team members would be right or wrong, and so on. And this process, of course, needs to be moderated. The bigger your team is, the harder the universal consensus is to reach. Sometimes it's like impossible, so you need to moderate it cleverly. Now, let's say you've built it. There's going to be a transition period from not having the framework to having the framework in full power. And navigating this transition needs to be done very carefully, because no matter what framework you build and what you include there, there's going to be a bunch of discrepancies between the set of expectations defined in your framework and the status quo, the real life. Let's say there's a well-regarded senior engineer that you have who has been receiving good performance reviews for a while, and they think of them as a very good senior engineer. And then suddenly you discover that their manager has really overlooked a bunch of areas that you would like every senior engineer to actually cover. And suddenly, this senior engineer needs to cover them out of the blue. They're going to be frustrated. That is for sure. So you need to give them time and necessary support to adjust and stay flexible, right? So don't just say, okay, this is the career progression framework. The very next performance review is going to be done based on that. So probably not the very next one. However, remaining flexible in the moment and throughout the transition doesn't mean that you can remain flexible about the end goal. No, the end goal should be very clear. You should be firm about it. The end goal is that this framework is the core bit that is informing performance evaluations. Now, once you've built a framework and rolled it out, don't change the system, at least not often, because moving goalposts are not very appreciated by people, and it's very stressful for them when expectations change. So what you can do is extending it, like introducing new roles, new add-on roles, more fidelity, like a new role between two existing roles where the gap between them was too large, and that sort of stuff. And finally, as mentioned before already, don't forget team-specific expectations from roles, because when you define a career progression framework, people start prioritizing their work and their activities related to the expectations defined in this framework over everything else, because this is what they're going to be evaluated against, right? So make sure that there are team-specific expectations defined, or clarifications of the framework defined on the team level, but very clearly. It can be something like, in a particular team, a senior engineer is supposed to do level 3 support of customers. They're supposed to do also on-call, for instance, which for the folks on the same level in the other teams aren't supposed to be doing. So that needs to be defined on that team. Otherwise, it can even be that the senior engineer says, oh, okay, the career progression framework doesn't tell me that I need to do level 3 support. And that's the part of my work that I dislike the most. So I'm going to stop doing this. And so for that not to happen, do define it as a set of team-specific expectations. All right, enough about career progression frameworks. I could talk about them for the rest of the day. I love them so much and enjoy building them as well. But yeah, we need to move on to the next goal of a good and healthy performance management system for engineers or for individuals in general. That is definitely a shared one. And that is monitoring and improving performance of individuals. And what this is about is basically feedback. I'm going to have to be very brief about this, although feedback is on its own like a topic for a separate presentation that I'll probably hold at some other day, on some other day. But yeah, this is about 3 major aspects of feedback, or types of feedback, if you will. First of all, day-to-day feedback. It needs to be done right. So in an authentic way, so you mean what you say, giving feedback. Regularly, timely, so you don't wait to give feedback about some event that happened. Evidence-based, of course, so it's not based on your assumptions, but it's based on facts. Balanced. Don't over-rotate on, negative feedback. Make sure that there's enough, not enough, but an appropriate amount of positive feedback given, as much as the individual deserves, and also in appropriate context. This is about, not giving negative feedback to an individual in front of the entire team and so on. Now, there needs to be a 360 spectrum of feedback, of directions of feedback, channels of feedback, meaning you want to avoid silos. Even if it's not just you, which is the worst, if it's not just you giving feedback to the individual and the immediate team, their peers also give feedback, it may not be enough because there are other teams that they interact with. They also have team members, managers, and so on. So there needs to be feedback channeled from the outside of your team. And these channels need to be inclusive, not only in the sense that you cover all relevant teams, but also in the sense that you cover all types of personalities and cultures, right? So, for instance, if the channel of giving feedback to your team is confronting your team member with the feedback, you will find that not everyone is comfortable doing this. So yeah, so maybe you want to have an asynchronous and not a face-to-face channel of giving feedback. And also you need to encourage in like these channels, you need to encourage balanced feedback. So it shouldn't be like, okay, if you have a problem with someone from my team, please complete this form. Guess what? You'll get only information about problems with your team members, and you then won't necessarily get the props from other teams that they wanted to deliver to a specific person. So the channels need to encourage balanced feedback. And finally, another topic for a full presentation that I have to rush through, it's regular appraisals done well. So you want to avoid recency bias, which means that they're done every 3 to 12 months, but we can only reasonably remember the last month in detail. So we need to do something to avoid only mentioning the results of the last month, because this needs to cover the entire assessment period. Usually that is done via taking notes throughout. You want to avoid mood congruent memory bias, which is because of how our brains work. Let's say if you're angry and you're writing someone's performance review, you'll tend to write a more negative one than necessary, than would be fair. Likewise, if you're very happy, you'll probably write a more positive performance review than would be appropriate. So whilst it's probably less bad than writing a too negative one, you just want to write the appropriate one, right? Avoid bias. Also, there should be no surprises, but if you're doing day-to-day feedback right, then the person whom you are writing an appraisal for will have heard all of the points that you have to say there from you already. And you want to do a full snapshot of the person's performance against role expectations, meaning you just go through the expectations described in the career progression framework and one by one address them. And finally, of course, if you want to give some improvement suggestions, you want to do that based on the seniority of the person you're giving them to in the particular area. So if they're senior there, you probably can just set the goal and expect them to figure out the path. If they're less senior there, or even like quite junior, you probably will want to at least kind of outline the path for them. That's it about monitoring and improving performance of individuals. You monitor it with the 360 spectrum of feedback, with the channels that you provide and with regular appraisals, and improve it via feedback that you're delivering. Again, regular appraisals and day-to-day feedback. Now let's talk about providing sufficient and convincing evidence for underperformance and promotion-related decisions. This basically boils down to managing underperformance and managing great performance. So managing underperformance, very simplistically, is a feedback-fed process. So first you do evidence-based evaluation based on the list of criteria that is defined in your career progression framework. You provide an evidence-based feedback to the person, and then you support them and monitor the progress. Supporting them may mean even adjusting the processes of your team if it's not them, it's the process that's wrong, and other stuff. You can support them in learning things that they need to learn to thrive. Then you do another evidence-based evaluation, identify the remaining gaps, provide feedback about them, and go into another cycle of supporting and monitoring, and then evaluation. At some point, at the nth iteration, you may find that your evidence-based evaluation shows that the progress so far is kind of dissatisfying. And you may need to make a decision. Now, because a decision in such a context usually means to people like a very, very concrete decision, very specific decision. I want to call it out specifically that a decision here does not equal termination. This is actually hopefully not a termination of a person. So you don't want to let them go just because you're dissatisfied with their progress. There are other options. Now, what options? And to talk about these options, basically options of what to do if feedback doesn't help an underperformer improve, I want to ask you a question. And here I'm going to need your opinion. So you can probably go to the PineTool chat and send me some messages. Right. So how much do you think it costs to replace an employee? And while you're putting in your opinions in the chat of the PineTool, let me talk about the inputs to this formula. So it definitely depends on how senior the person is, right? It depends on how unique their skill set is. It depends on the situation on the market currently. Are there many folks who are looking for a job? Are there few? Is there much demand for this particular skill set? It depends on what tasks they are currently assigned to, right? Because a lot of it is going to be opportunity cost. While you're looking for someone else, projects are not progressing or progressing slower, which kind of, prolongs the way towards completion there, towards new features and the new income. Right. So there is an opinion in the chat. 10% annual salary. Okay, that's a good guess. Okay. Right. Okay. So I think in the interest of time, let me just reveal the answer based on the calculations I've done throughout the years, and based on the calculations of other folks that I've seen. Depending on the modeling and on the inputs and on everything, it's actually much more than 10% of annual salary. Thank you, Vitautas, for the guess. It's usually in the range of 0.5 to 3 times the person's annual salary. And interestingly enough, it can go much higher depending on the inputs, but it can't really go much lower than that. Because if you calculate the opportunity cost into this, it just kind of spirals out of control, really. And you're like, oh my God, okay. With the opportunity cost, it's actually quite a lot of cost. So not only letting someone go because of underperformance is often a mean thing to do, because it's not a clean cut, right? So they're not perhaps not terrible, not doing terrible, but they are kind of a little bit mediocre, and you can't do anything about it. So it may be a mean move, but it's also a very expensive move. So I suggest that you consider 3 what-ifs to cater for actually something that Simon Copsey talked on this track earlier today, that it may be that the underperformance isn't inherently because of the person. It is because of some mismatch of the person and some aspects of the environment. So 3 what-ifs to consider here. The first one, what if the team the person works in isn't the right one for them? They may need a more suitable set of similar tasks like development tasks, a different environment, or even just a different boss, which is a very hard pill to swallow for many of us as managers, because we think of ourselves as sort of good bosses. And here it turns out we may not be a good boss for them. But with such a cost, it is really important to consider that. So maybe there's a different position and a different team that you want to look for. Another what if is, what if the level the person is on was misassigned to them and is too big a stretch for them currently? This is a bit of a can of worms, because although these mistakes happen, like a promotion that was given too early, or a person hired as a senior engineer who's not all that senior, and that sort of stuff, depending on the labor law in the country we're talking about, it may or may not be possible to actually fix. So it may be possible to effectively demote a person, come to them, say, okay, look, so here's the mistake that happened. Here's the aftermath of it. You do want to have a different set of expectations for you, because otherwise we'd be talking about underperformance, and we don't have a good path forward. So let's maybe adjust it. And sometimes it's going to be possible. In some areas, like where I live in Germany, for instance, you may be able to reduce their level, but you may not be able to reduce their salary. So yeah, there are things to consider. You may want to go to your HR team and talk about this. But yeah, if this is an option, it may be an option to consider with a mutual agreement, of course, with the agreement from the person that was misleveled. And also, another what if the role they work in isn't fully suitable for them? And by that I mean, actually, they may need an adjacent role. So not in my personal experience, I've had several folks getting transferred from, let's say, a software engineer to a software engineer in test, or from a QA position into a junior product manager position, and they thrived there. They worked better there. They were a better fit. And also, sometimes you've been desperately looking for a product manager for this role, and here you have an underperforming QA who would be a good fit. And that kind of solves two problems at once. So this is another good what if to consider. And only if nothing else works, then you can think of parting ways. Now let's talk about a more rewarding thing, a positive thing, managing great performance. It's often overlooked because people tend to over-rotate on managing underperformance, whereas managing great performers is much more pleasant, and also, sometimes even more important. And here, it's simple. Proactivity is key. You already do check their performance against the career progression framework regularly as part of regular appraisals, right? Usually every 3 to 12 months. Now, if you see that they're doing great against the expectations of their current level, check how they're doing against the expectations of the next one. And if they're close, bring it up with them, tell them they're great, and support them in reaching the next step if they're up for it. Sometimes they may want to enjoy their comfort zone for a while. If you check and they are already doing well against the expectations of the next level, then go and proactively suggest a promotion. So there's arguably nothing quite like your boss coming to you and proactively suggesting that you should be promoted, right? So yeah, it's that simple, but also super important. That simple, provided you have a career progression framework to work with, right? And now let's talk about the final goal of a healthy performance management system, which is facilitating people's career progression. There's a bunch of things to consider there. You should run personal development coaching sessions with everyone regularly. You can also refer to them as career coaching. Usually it would be done after regular appraisals, usually every 6 months. You can do every 12 months. It would be to my taste, a bit too infrequent. You can do every 3 months, but that's too frequent. Usually there's nothing much happening within 3 months. So yeah, it makes sense to do it every 6 months. In these sessions, you create personal development plans for the next 6 months. You track the progress. You can even track the progress during one-on-ones with the folks, but at least in these sessions. And you set SMART goals, so specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, in this personal development plan to achieve the next level of your career progression framework. And do make sure to specify the resources the person can use to achieve every goal you define there. Importantly, make these personal development plans about them, the person. Define their long-term career goal, not your long-term career goal you see for them. It may be becoming a CTO or becoming a founder, building something specific, maybe early retirement even, because people consider their job as a means to an end, right? But importantly, it must be their goal and their path towards it, even if this is not necessarily at your company. What you will define at your company is the immediate next step. So it's going to be with you, coaching them through that towards their next level on the career progression framework. And finally, you need to agree on how they work towards the goals. So some goals can be worked towards within working hours. Some goals need a lot of personal time invested, like learning new programming language. You will need to provide resources and support they need. So give them time if you promise time. Give them the mentorship they require and so on, but don't overdo. If you do excessive handholding, you are accountable for their progress, whereas they should be accountable for their progress. Let's recap, because we're almost at the end of the session. So what does a healthy performance management framework for engineers look like? Define expectations, your career progression framework, team-specific role expectations, clear task level requirements, all of that. Do the day-to-day feedback well. It should be authentic, regular, should be done timely, evidence-based and balanced. Don't over-rotate on any particular bit, especially on criticism. Do regular appraisals well. No surprising feedback there, evidence-based, entire assessment time should be covered to fight recency bias, and there should be a full check of role criteria involved. Manage underperformers well, based on evidence, supporting people in the growth that's required there. If there's no result, try changing the environment, the team, or the role. Only then consider termination. Manage great performers well. Be proactive, anticipate the need for promotion, and do personal development process properly. Regular career coaching, personal development plans that are about them, the person, providing resources, and making the person accountable for their growth. And with that, just a quick mention that I'm a big fan of building career progression frameworks. And if you want to build your own career progression framework, let's talk, do reach out. I will see what can be arranged to help you. And with that, thank you very much. Do you have any questions? Do we have time for questions, Darren?
We do. You're on point. See, I said you're a smooth operator. You left 2 or 3 minutes, and that's absolutely perfect. Folks, use that Q&A tab. I think we've actually already got a few coming in, actually, Anton, so I'll hop us straight into them. Great one coming in from Vitotus. They ask if the career progression framework should be very detailed and also should not be changed frequently. How do you keep it up to date and still relevant in a landscape that is always evolving and usually quite quickly?
That's a great question. Thank you very much for it. Indeed, we're working software engineering. It's notoriously fast-paced, and indeed, there must be a set of very good reasons that can be universally agreed on, like throughout your org, to change this. So you basically need to be able to sell these changes to the folks in your engineering organization. You can expect some frustration to still be there, but at least it should be that people understand why you're doing this. And let's say the company has switched from, I don't know, React to Angular, or vice versa. Universally. So the React relevant bits of the career progression framework don't make sense anymore. So, and that because everyone is working with Angular, everyone will just think of it, of the change that's done based on that as a necessary change. So that definitely is possible. This should just be a set of good reasons for this.
Okay, good response. We've got another question coming in from Julian. They were talking about your technical path. It showed 5 levels. They're wondering, in what cases should you add more levels? For example, like junior, mid, senior staff, principal, distinguished.
Right. So the technical part that I showed, first of all, thank you for the question. That's a very good one. The technical part that I showed was a technical path that a company called Redgate thought would be good for them. So the technical path for your company should be good for your company. And if you see the need for staff level, maybe there's staff, senior staff, and then principal. So there can be more levels. Now, but when to introduce this? Usually you want to do this when you see that you have, so to say, kind of many levels of hierarchy in your org. So usually a staff engineer, for instance, would be expected to operate on a cross-team level. A senior staff or a principal engineer would potentially be operating on a cross-department level. Now, if your engineering organization consists of one department, you probably don't need principal engineers just yet. Or maybe you want to create this role for two particular people whom you want to define the next steps for, because you clearly see that they've outgrown the last role defined for them in your career progression framework. That would also be a case when you can think about this.
Okay, yeah. Kind of like a got the folder, drop it inside the folder type approach, right? You kind of compact it
Yes.
down as you go. Makes sense. Simple is always good. Was it the classic saying is like slow is fast, fast is simple, something like that. I always forget the one. It's like a military saying. But Anton, I just realized we're a little bit over time, but it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you, folks. If you do have more questions for Anton, you've got his details right there. Be sure to reach out. But a pleasure to talk to you, my friend. I'm sure we'll be seeing you again very soon.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, everyone. Cheers.